Chapter 21. Brain Dead. 3 hours earlier, Dinesh had hitched a lift home in Kelvin's car with April and Junior. He lived with his mum and dad in a flash house a few doors down from Keith Moore. Mr. Singh was in his study, working on his laptop. Dinesh wasn't surprised to find him there, even though it was past 11. "Good time at the youth club?" "Nothing very exciting," Dinesh said. "Did Mum ring up?" "She asked me to make sure you washed behind your ears and changed your underpants." "Very funny, Dad," Dinesh said, grinning. "I'm off to bed. Don't sit up working all night." Dinesh had brushed his teeth and was getting into bed when he heard a saloon car pull onto the driveway. Sometimes cars used the drive to turn around, but this one stopped, and Dinesh watched 2 doors open. Another car stopped behind. It was white, with blue lights and cop markings on the roof. "Dad?" Dinesh shouted. The 2 cops from the first car were in plain clothes. The 3 out of the second wore uniform and carried rifles. 2 cops split off and jogged around the house, covering the back exit. Dinesh quickly slid on his tracksuit bottoms and ran onto the landing. "Dad?" Dinesh shouted again, nervously. "The police are outside." The front door exploded into the hallway. Police never ring the doorbell when it's a drug bust because it gives the suspect a chance to destroy evidence. Dinesh had never seen a gun outside of a museum before. Now 2 were aimed at his head. "On the floor," the cop barked. "Hands where I can see 'em." They ran up the stairs towards Dinesh, who was trying to stop himself shaking. "Don't be frightened, son," the cop said. "Where's your old man?" Mr. Singh opened the door of his study. The guns swung towards him. "Hands in the air." One of the plainclothes cops bounded up the stairs. He pushed Mr. Singh against the wall and locked on handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you do say can be taken down and used in evidence against you." The armed cop looked down at Dinesh. "Who else is home?" "Nobody," Dinesh said. "Where's your mum?" "Barcelona. She's back tomorrow." "How old are you?" 12. "We can't leave you here on your own," the cop said. "You'll have to come with us." A police car pulled up on the driveway. Dinesh looked nervous when Zara opened the door. "You don't mind me staying, do you?" Dinesh asked. "They asked me to think of somewhere I could go until Mum gets home. Kerry was the first person I thought of." "Don't worry," Zara said, putting her hand on Dinesh's shoulder. "There are so many kids coming in and out of this house, one more won't make any difference." The cop gave Zara a custody form to sign while Dinesh wandered into the living room. Kerry stood up and gave him a hug. "I'm so sorry about your dad," Kerry said. "I told you he was a crook," Dinesh said angrily. "It was bound to happen sooner or later." He looked at the duvets and pillows scattered around the living room. "We couldn't sleep," Kerry explained. "They had to take Nicole to the hospital." "Is it serious?" "Kyle called from the hospital. They gave her an adrenaline shot to bring her around. Then they pumped her stomach." "I saw that on TV once," Dinesh said. "It's so nasty. They force a rubber tube down your throat and right down into your stomach." "They'll keep her in under observation for a few hours," James said, "but they reckon she'll be okay." Dinesh managed a smile. "I wouldn't want to be in her shoes when she gets home." It was gone 3 a.m. when a cab dropped Kyle home from the hospital. Zara told them all to go upstairs and try to get some rest. Dinesh slept on Nicole's bed. While the mission was going smoothly, Hewitt had been acting calm, but when he shook James awake at 11 o'clock that Saturday morning, he looked rabid. "In the bathroom, now," Hewitt barked. James said, still half asleep. Hewitt grabbed James by his wrist and practically dislocated his shoulder as he yanked him out of bed. He shoved James towards the bathroom, bolted the door, and bundled him up to the wall. "We've got to keep the noise down while Dinesh is in the house," Hewitt whispered. "But you better start giving me straight answers about last night, or I'm going to make you sorry." "I haven't done anything," James said. "So what's this then?" Hewitt asked, producing the metal straw that had come out of Junior's cocaine. There were still specks of white powder stuck on one end. "It's not mine," James said. Liar, Hewitt snarled. I was checking inside the pockets before I put the washing on. It was in your jeans. James realised he must have pocketed it when Kelvin had surprised them. I swear I never took coke, James said frantically. That belongs to Junior. I must have picked it up by mistake. Hewitt opened the medicine cabinet and took out a plastic sample bottle. We'll see, won't we? I got 3 of these at the hospital last night, Hewitt said. Pay in that. I'm going to have yours, Kyle's, and Kerry's urine samples tested, and if there's cocaine in there, you'll be out on your ass with Nicole. James was pleased to see the sample bottle. The test would clear up any argument. Give it here, he said, smirking confidently. How much do you want to bet that I'm clean? 50 quid? 100? Cut the smart mouth, Hewitt said, and piss. James angrily snatched the bottle off Hewitt, flipped up the plastic lid and stood over the toilet. He was usually busting when he woke up, but he couldn't go with Hewitt standing behind him. Can't you wait outside? James asked. You might tamper with it, Hewitt said. Try thinking about waterfalls or something. When he'd finished, James handed the bottle to Hewitt. Any money you like, he said cockily. His air of confidence had taken the edge off Hewitt's anger. Go back to your room and tell Kyle to get over here. After Kyle had gone, James slumped on his bed feeling pleased with himself. Hewitt would look like an idiot when the drug test came back. Then he had a horrible thought. If Kelvin had called down the stairs a couple of seconds later... James relived the drunken instant when the dish of white powder was just centimetres from his face. He felt sick when he realised how close he'd come to snorting a dangerous drug, and getting himself booted out of CHERUB. Chapter 22. Nicole. Junior called James on his mobile. Dude. You sound happy, James said. What's up? It's pandemonium here, Junior said. I've got a killer hangover, and the pigs arrested over 80 KMG people last night. My dad thinks he's about to get busted. He keeps running up to the curtain every time a bird flies past the window. Mr. Singh got nabbed, James said. Dinesh spent the night here. Hewitt's taken him to the airport to meet his mum. They nicked Uncle George and Uncle Pete, Junior said. Well, they're not my real uncles, but they've been working for Dad since before I was born. So how come you're in a good mood? James asked. Nicole, of course, Junior said. I had my hands everywhere. No offence, James. I know she's your sister and everything. She's in hospital, James said. The coke did her in. No way, Junior gasped. That explains why I couldn't get her mobile. Is she okay? Yeah, but I wouldn't get your hopes up about seeing her anytime soon. She overdosed once before, James said, repeating Zara's latest cover story. Hewitt and Zara are terrified that she's going to end up killing herself. They've arranged for her to go back to her care home in London for a psychiatric assessment. Oh my God, Junior blurted. I'm really sorry, man. I'd never have offered her coke if I'd known she had a problem. How long will she be gone for? James said, scratching for an answer. It all depends on the assessment, I suppose. She might not be back at all. Anyway, I just heard Zara pulling up with a carload of shopping. She goes loopy if I don't help her unload. I'll see you then, Junior said. April asked if you fancied coming round for Sunday lunch. Maybe, James said. I don't know what's going on at the moment, with Nicole and that. I'll ring you later. James ended the call. There really was a car pulling up, but it was John Jones. Zara made tea while John Jones explained what had been going on over the last 24 hours. It all came out of the production facility you kids found at Thunder Foods. KMG imports and distributes cocaine through lots of different channels, but you guys uncovered the weakest link in the chain. Almost every gram was being packaged in the automated plant at Thunder Foods. We wired the place with cameras and bugs and watched everybody who came and went through binoculars. I've been on drug investigations where you go months without finding a good lead. Once we had Thunder Foods under surveillance, we started getting so much information, we had to bring in extra staff to handle it. You'd get a couple of guys coming in to mix and package a few kilos of coke. It's boring work, so they'd usually start gossiping. They were off guard, and the quality of the information was unbelievable. Names, dates, phone numbers, flight numbers. What are you doing next week? Where's your next shipment coming in? What deal is old so-and-so working on at the moment? We've made 100 arrests already, but we're not even scratching the surface. We're sending information to police stations all over the country, and another 200 or 300 guys are going to get pulled over the next few days. By the time we're done, KMG will be lucky if it can sell a bag of sweets in a school playground. I just spoke to Junior, James said. Keith Moore still hasn't been arrested. And that's politics, John said. Us MI5 guys wanted to keep the undercover work going until we had enough evidence to get Keith, but the police wouldn't hold out. They've got hundreds of people working on Operation Snort. Not just police officers, but the administration and backup staff that go with them. It's costing over £1 million a month, and there was talk of shutting it down if they didn't start getting results. So Keith Moore might get off? Kerry asked. John smiled uneasily. I hope not, Kerry. I'd say out of the top 10 people in KMG, we've got enough evidence to put 8 in prison. We're going to try and flip a couple of those guys. We're offering total immunity from prosecution. Given a choice between 20 years in prison and walking home to your wife and kids, we reckon a few people might start tattling on Keith Moore. So is there anything special we should be looking out for? Kyle asked. I'd be amazed if you kids make another breakthrough to match the one you've made already, John said. Just keep in with the bad guys and we'll see if anything else turns up. Actually, kids, Zara said, I had to phone Mac and explain what happened with Nicole. He seems to think we've achieved most of what we set out to do. He's not impressed by what happened to Nicole, and he wants the rest of you out of harm's way. I expect we'll be heading back to campus in a few weeks, so you might want to start dropping hints to your friends. Suggest that Ewart has gone for a job interview, and there's a chance you might be moving back to London. John Jones did his routine of shaking everyone's hands before he left. Of course, he said, holding on to Kerry's hand after he'd shaken it. This young lady is the biggest hero of the lot. Kerry still had an ear-to-ear grin 5 minutes after John Jones had driven away. James got sick of looking at it and chucked Joshua's furry cement mixer at her head. Kerry chucked it back, and they ended up chasing each other around the dining table, along the hallway, and into the living room. I'm a hero, Kerry sang as she ran. Hero, 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 hero. James chucked a couple of sofa cushions at her. Kerry bundled James onto the floor and pinned him down. She grabbed his ankle and started tickling the bottom of his feet. It was James's weakest spot. Within 30 seconds, she'd reduced him to a drooling wreck. Okay, James gasped. You're a hero! You're a hero! Kerry stood up sharply and straightened her expression. Ewart and Nicole stood in the doorway, stone-faced. James got off the floor and wiped his lips on his sleeve. They tested your samples at the hospital, Ewart said. You two are both clean for drugs, though they found higher levels of alcohol than I'd like to have seen. Especially you, James. I know you're allowed to drink if you're in a situation where the kids around you are drinking, but that's not a license to go crazy. So you're glad you didn't bet me 50 quid? James grinned. Ewart gave James a vicious look. He definitely wasn't in the mood for joking. Go help Nicole pack and say your goodbyes, Ewart said. I'm driving her back to campus in half an hour. Where's Kyle? He's in the kitchen, Kerry said. Right, Ewart said angrily. Let's go and sort him out. Ewart stormed off and slammed the kitchen door. What's Kyle done? Kerry asked, looking at Nicole. Don't know, don't care, Nicole said bitterly. I suppose he failed his drug test. No way, James said. He wasn't doing coke with me and Junior, Nicole said, but he's been going to loads of parties. Who knows what he gets up to? Oh my God, Kerry said, cupping her hands over her face. This is so sad. Nicole started up the stairs. Kerry and James followed her. How do you feel? Kerry asked. Not bad, except my stomach's agony, and I feel like I've got an elephant standing on my head. I'm really sorry about what happened to you, James said, as they stepped into the girls' bedroom. It could have been any one of us. Nicole smiled. By the skin of your teeth, James. How's that? Kerry asked. He was ready to snort a line, Nicole explained, but he got distracted. You moron, Kerry said, giving James a shove. You told me you tried to stop Nicole. That's not what I said, James squirmed. That's exactly what you said, James. So, anyone who takes drugs is a moron? Nicole asked. Kerry? Nicole, Kerry said angrily. If you'd passed out when you were in bed instead of on the stairs, nobody would have realised until morning. You might have died. You're so sly, Kerry, Nicole stormed. You and your prissy I'm a good girl act. What do you want me to do? Kerry asked. Congratulate you on getting expelled? I don't care about any of this cherub stuff, Nicole said defiantly. It's just a bunch of dumb kids getting hot under the collar over who wears what colour t-shirt and what stupid missions they've been on. Who cares about any of that anyway? They're going to set me up with a foster family and a place in a nice public school. I can have a boyfriend, chill out, and lead a normal life. Don't you get it, Dumbo? Kerry said, tapping her head with her finger. You nearly died last night. You don't know what you're talking about, Nicole said, shoving Kerry backwards. Don't you dare touch me, Kerry said, rearing up on the balls of her feet. I could kick your butt so easily, but you're such a worthless tramp I can't even be bothered. Kerry spun around and stormed towards the door. James went to follow her, but Nicole called him back. Stay and help me pack, James? There was a desperate touch in Nicole's voice that made him turn back. Go ahead, help her, Kerry said. You can make sure she doesn't rip off my stuff. Kerry banged the door and stomped downstairs to the living room. Nicole dragged a sports bag from under her bed and started filling it. You know, James, Nicole said, you're a good laugh. You don't belong at CHERUB either. You've no idea how badly I need CHERUB, James said. Sometimes all the work and training does my head in, but my life was a nightmare before I came here. I was in some crummy council home and I kept getting in trouble. If CHERUB hadn't picked me, I probably would have ended up in prison. I'm glad I'm out of it, Nicole said, zipping up her bag. As long as my new foster parents don't turn out to be old farts. What is it you've got against old people? James asked. Nicole sat on the edge of her bed. You know my family died in a car crash? I'd heard. They were crossing a road in broad daylight. This stupid old fool sailed his car through a red light and smashed into them. They tested his eyes after the accident, and it turned out he could barely see past the end of his own nose. Oh, it's so bad, James said. I'm so sorry. If it had been a young guy, they would at least have locked him away. But no, because it was some old fart, they took pity and let him off. My mum, my dad, and my little brothers were killed, and he totally got away with it. Then everyone goes around telling me I should have respect for old people. Well, they can shove that idea right up their ass. Hewitt leaned in the door and looked at Nicole. Are you packed? Just finishing off, Nicole said. Okay, Hewitt said. I'm going to the toilet. I'll see you at the bottom of the stairs in 5 minutes. Wish me luck? Nicole asked, looking at James. Sure, James said, wrapping his arms around her and giving her a squeeze. She had a tear rolling down her cheek. James carried one of Nicole's bags out to the people carrier. Kerry stood in the living room doorway with folded arms and a frosty expression. James thought it was a shame Kerry and Nicole had fallen out. They'd got on so well up until now. Zara came out from the kitchen, gave Nicole a hug and wished her good luck with whatever life she chose to lead. When the car started pulling off the driveway, Kerry had a change of heart and ran onto the doorstep. She stood between James and Zara and waved Nicole off. I hope she sorts herself out, Kerry said. We'll set her up with a good family, Zara said. I think she'll be better off in the long run. Not everyone is cut out to be a cherub. Oh, James said, suddenly remembering. What happened with Kyle? It's his business, Zara said. It's up to him whether he wants you guys to know or not. James and Kerry found Kyle face down on his bunk, having a sulk. Why was Hewitt having a go at you? James asked. They found traces of cannabis in my urine sample, Kyle said. Almost every drug you could name passes through your body in a day or so. Unfortunately for me, cannabis lingers in your system for up to 3 weeks. But you did take some? Kerry said, sounding outraged. It's not some massive deal, Kerry, Kyle said defensively. I had a few puffs of a joint that was going around at some kid's house 2 Saturdays ago. So how come you're not expelled? Kerry asked. Cannabis is a Class C drug, Kyle explained. I would have been sent back to campus, but they could hardly send me and Nicole away on the same day without it looking suspicious. So you're going to get your booty spanked when we go back to campus? James grinned. That's how it looks, Kyle said. Probably a few weeks scrubbing floors, followed by a few months suspended from missions.